What if your overthinking isn't your flaw? What if it's the very strategy society used to keep you obedient? You weren't born with this constant mental noise, the loops that keep spinning, the scenarios that never happen, the questions with no answers. That's not you. That's a system running in the background, installed early, reinforced often, and praised when it kept you quiet. Maybe no one ever told you this, but your mind didn't become chaotic on its own. It was trained to be loud, to predict, to please, to apologize in advance, to second guess, not because you're weak, but because somewhere along the line, someone needed you to be manageable, contained, predictable. So you learned to obey by thinking. You call it being careful, being prepared, being responsible. But under that mask is something far more exhausting, a need to anticipate everyone's reaction, a reflex to fix what isn't yours to fix, a habit of shrinking before you even take up space. And worst of all, you've confused it for intelligence, for caution, for being emotionally mature. But here's the truth no one says out loud. Overthinking is not wisdom, it's captivity, because real clarity doesn't spin. Real awareness is still. When the mind is healthy, it doesn't over-explain. It doesn't rehearse conversations that never happened. It doesn't need permission to feel at peace. But your mind never rests. Not because something is wrong with you, but because something was programmed into you. You were rewarded for being quiet, praised for being good, taught that if you just anticipate enough, fix enough, soften yourself enough, then maybe nothing bad will happen. So now, every decision feels like a test. Every silence feels like a threat. Every moment alone with your thoughts feels like drowning in static. And you don't even realize it's not your fault. You weren't taught how to be powerful. You were taught how to survive. And survival, in the world you grew up in, meant pleasing, predicting, overthinking, being one step ahead of someone else's disappointment. They never showed you how to say no without guilt, how to trust silence, how to stay still and know your worth without performing it. Instead, they taught you to fill every pause, apologize for every breath, be available, be nice, be careful, and think. Always think, because thinking kept you small enough to stay safe. So now, you carry that script. You run it automatically. In love, in work, in friendships. You wonder why you feel exhausted, disconnected, anxious even when nothing is wrong. It's because your brain is still rehearsing how to not be rejected, how to not be too much, how to not make a mistake. But here's the twist. The more you think, the more you betray yourself. You stop trusting your instincts. You ignore your boundaries. You explain instead of choosing. You react instead of deciding. Because you've been trained to think like prey. And prey doesn't pause to ask what it wants. It runs. It calculates. It watches every move, waiting for the next threat. But you're not prey anymore. You just haven't remembered that yet. This isn't about stopping all your thoughts. It's about seeing them clearly for what they are: old defenses, outdated instructions, echoes from a past that no longer owns you. And maybe, just maybe, if you sit with this long enough, you'll realize that the noise isn't you. It's a system begging to be dismantled. And freedom? It starts when you stop believing every thought you have is yours. If this feels like your story, stay. We're just getting started. You check your phone 5 times in the same minute. You replay that last conversation, analyzing every word, every pause, every shift in tone. You imagine what could go wrong before anything has even started. You prepare for rejection before anyone has a chance to accept you. And you call this caution. But it's not. It's captivity. Overthinking is not your careful nature. It's your conditioned fear. It's not your intuition sharpening. It's your nervous system reacting. It's not your fault. It's your training. You were taught to anticipate pain as a way of avoiding it. And that became your default setting. Always calculating. Always bracing. Always trying to be one step ahead of disappointment. Somewhere deep down, you believed if you could just think hard enough, worry long enough, rehearse perfectly enough, you could protect yourself from being hurt again. But pain doesn't come from lack of preparation. It comes from attachment to control. That's the trap. You've mistaken anxiety for awareness, overthinking for insight. But real insight doesn't scream. It doesn't keep you up at night. It doesn't tighten your chest or make your heart race at every silence. That's not wisdom. That's a wound. And it's not yours alone. It's cultural. It's inherited. It's systemic. You were taught early that love is earned through behavior. That safety depends on how well you read the room. That worth is tied to how little trouble you cause. So now, you don't wait for people to tell you what they need. You try to figure it out before they say a word. You shapeshift, you tone yourself down, you calculate how much of you is safe to show. And you call it being smart, or kind, or considerate. But it's not kindness. It's fear dressed up in people-pleasing. It's not thoughtfulness. It's hypervigilance. And it's not a choice you made. It's a survival tactic you were never given permission to unlearn. Because if you were always worrying, always doubting, always reevaluating, you were easy to manage. You didn't rock the boat. You didn't ask for more. You stayed in your place. So now, your brain thinks worry is responsible. Doubt is humility. Overthinking is maturity. But it's not. It's just the echo of a system that wanted you small. And when that system speaks, it sounds like your own voice. That's why it's so hard to spot. That's why you believe the anxiety is your identity. But it's not. It's your conditioning. A cage you mistake for common sense. You are not broken. You are responding exactly how you were wired to respond. But that doesn't mean you have to stay here. Because here's the truth no one told you. Thought is not power when it spirals. Thought becomes power when it pauses. And you've been running so long in your mind, you forgot what stillness feels like. That stillness, the space between thoughtses, where your real voice lives. It's where your clarity lives. It's where you remember that your mind is a tool, not your master. But to reach that space, you have to unlearn the belief that thinking more makes you safer. It doesn't. It only makes you smaller. It keeps you in emotional rehearsal instead of lived experience. It keeps you guessing instead of expressing. It keeps you protecting yourself from something that may never happen, while losing connection with what's happening right now. That's the real cost. Because overthinking doesn't just drain your energy, it kills your presence. And when you're not present, you don't show up. Not in relationships, not in conversations, not in your own life. You ghost yourself before anyone else gets the chance. So no, this isn't about being cautious. This is about being trapped in a loop that was designed to keep you obedient. You were never meant to think your way through life. You were meant to feel it, live it, move through it. And the more you try to control the unknown with thoughts, the more you lose your power in the present. It's not sensitivity. It's a trauma response. It's not intelligence. It's inner chaos wearing a mask. It's not your personality. It's your programming. And the moment you see it, really see it, something shifts. You stop identifying with the noise. You start reclaiming the silence underneath. The part of you that's always been calm, always been wise, always been free. And from that place, you no longer need to control every outcome. You just need to choose your next breath. and let it be enough. He who overthinks will obey before he even hears the command. Machiavelli understood something that most people today still struggle to see. Control does not always wear a crown. It doesn't need shackles or threats. It only needs confusion. And confusion, when sustained long enough, turns into self-regulation. That's the brilliance of subtle power. You don't have to force people to obey. You just make them unsure. Unsure of themselves. Unsure of what's safe. Unsure of what's expected. And then they fall in line willingly, quietly, even gratefully. When the mind is overwhelmed with possibilities, with imagined consequences, with invisible rules, it loses clarity. And without clarity, the only thing left is fear. Fear disguised as logic. Fear wearing the face of, "I'm just being cautious." Machiavelli never believed in the morality of power. He believed in the mechanics of it. And one of the most effective tools of control, he argued, was psychological ambiguity. If people are unclear about where they stand, they won't risk moving. If they can't tell what is safe, they'll stop reaching. If they are constantly doubting their own instincts, they will wait for orders, even when no one is giving them. This is the architecture of invisible obedience. You don't need to chain the body when you've already shackled the mind. Look around you. Look inside you. How many times have you stopped yourself not because someone said no, but because you imagined the rejection before it happened? How often do you rehearse your words, censor your feelings, dilute your truth not because it's wrong, but because you fear the fallout of clarity? You've been trained to believe that uncertainty is your default state. That doubt makes you responsible. That second guessing is a form of humility. But that's not humility. That's confusion made to look noble. And as Machiavelli would say, confusion is not an accident, it's design. There is power in clarity. Not just political power, personal power, internal sovereignty. The kind of power that allows you to say, "This is who I am, this is what I feel, this is what I choose." No apologies, no shrinking, no fear of being misunderstood. Because the truth is, when you are clear, you become dangerous to systems that rely on your doubt. You stop asking for permission, you stop seeking validation, you stop performing. And suddenly, the manipulation doesn't work on you anymore. But here's what keeps most people stuck. They confuse noise with awareness. They think that the more thoughts they have, the more awake they are. But noise is not clarity. It's orchestration, a performance of distraction, a loop designed to keep you spinning, doubting, submitting. That's why overthinking is not just a personal habit, it's a cultural strategy. Keep people questioning themselves long enough, and they will hand over their power without a fight. That's what Machiavelli meant when he said, "Fear is a more reliable tool than love." He didn't say it to be cruel. He said it to reveal how easy it is to govern people who fear their own clarity. Because a person who thinks clearly cannot be manipulated easily. They won't stay in places where they are not valued. They won't accept crumbs and call it enough. They won't betray themselves for the sake of fitting in. And that makes them hard to control. So ask yourself, what have you been calling maturity that is actually fear? What have you been calling awareness that is actually overthinking? What have you been labeling as just being careful that is really self-sabotage? You don't have to answer right away, just notice. Because noticing is the beginning of clarity. And once clarity arrives, confusion no longer feels like a personality trait. It feels like a burden you're finally ready to set down. You were never meant to live in a fog. You were never meant to be stuck in mental rehearsals. You were meant to move with precision, speak with truth, decide with ease. But first, You must reclaim the space confusion has taken from you. You must remember that power isn't about being louder or tougher or smarter. Power is the calm that comes when you know what is yours and what is not. It is the stillness that says, I don't chase, I choose. I don't beg, I observe. I don't overthink, I understand. And that kind of stillness, that's not the absence of thought, it's the presence of self. That's clarity, and clarity is power. Your mind is not weak, it's misused. That's the shift most people never make. They assume that because their thoughts feel out of control, they must be broken. But chaos isn't weakness. Confusion isn't failure. It's simply a sign that you've been using your mind against yourself, not with yourself. Imagine a radio tuned to the wrong frequency. No matter how good the speakers are, the sound will be static. The problem isn't the radio, it's where it's pointed. That's what happens when you've been raised to survive, not to listen. Your thoughts become noise instead of guidance. Anxiety replaces clarity. You're always alert, always scanning, always preparing, but never arriving, never landing in your own body, never feeling safe to be still. But here's the part no one tells you. Your mind was never designed to lead alone. It's a tool, not a compass. A servant, not a master. And when you let it run the show without direction, it doesn't create peace. It creates panic. The problem is not that you think too much. It's that you've never been taught how to use your thinking in service of your truth. Instead, you've used it to avoid, to protect, to predict. And that's understandable. That's what pain teaches you. But you don't have to keep living in that loop. You are not the static. You are the signal underneath it. And the signal is still there, even if you haven't heard it in a while. Even if all you hear right now is the inner critic, the doubt, the what-ifs, the should-haves. There is a version of you that does not speak in panic. It speaks in presence, not rushed, not afraid, just quietly knowing. And that version of you is waiting for you to stop identifying with the noise, waiting for you to pause long enough to feel what's real. Because what's real doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. Truth is calm. It's not flashy. It doesn't beg for attention. It doesn't play mental games. It's just there, steady, always ready to be heard. But to hear it, you have to make space, not by escaping, not by numbing, but by choosing what gets your energy and what doesn't. You don't owe your attention to every thought that arises. You don't have to follow every anxious storyline. You don't have to answer every imaginary scenario. Just because your mind offers it doesn't mean you have to take it. That's power. The quiet kind. The kind that lets you sit in discomfort without running. The kind that watches the wave of panic rise and still knows this too will pass. You've been told for so long that healing means becoming someone new, but it doesn't. It means remembering who you were before you forgot your own rhythm, before the world convinced you to be someone else. So here's the invitation. Not to fight your thoughts, but to understand them. To ask gently, whose voice is that? Whose fear am I carrying? Whose story am I still rehearsing? Because most of the noise in your head isn't even yours. It's old, it's borrowed, it's inherited. And it only stays because you never questioned it. You don't need to erase the noise. You just need to stop mistaking it for the truth. Start here, with one breath, one pause, one choice not to respond automatically. One moment of remembering that silence is not emptiness, it's clarity. And in that clarity, something shifts. Not all at once, not dramatically, but quietly. Like a radio slowly tuning in to the right signal. The static fades, and what remains is you. The you that doesn't panic in silence. The you that doesn't chase answers. The you that knows how to be still without collapsing. That self is not far. It's just been covered. Covered by noise, by habit, by fear pretending to be logic. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that's where the real change begins. Not with force, not with pressure, but with permission. Permission to stop spinning. Permission to stop performing. Permission to stop thinking of yourself as fragile just because your mind was never taught how to be still. If this resonates, maybe it's time to silence the noise. Not by escaping it, but by mastering its source. Not by becoming less of who you are, but by remembering who you were before the noise taught you to forget. And when you find that quiet within, you'll realize it was never empty. It was always you, waiting to be heard. Less thought, more power. That doesn't mean becoming careless. It doesn't mean shutting your mind down or pretending your fears don't exist. It means choosing your thoughts the way a sculptor chooses their tools, with clarity, with intention, with purpose. Because your mind is not the enemy. It's just been left unsupervised for too long. You've let it narrate your life without editing the script. You've allowed it to label fear as truth, doubt as logic, and mental noise as insight. But that ends the moment you stop asking your mind for permission to feel whole. The mind you tame becomes your tool. The one you obey becomes your cage. And you were not born to live in a cage. You were born with a mind powerful enough to imagine futures, but also still enough to know when to rest. A mind sharp enough to protect you, but wise enough to know when it's time to stop protecting and start living. You don't need to think less. You need to think differently. Not every problem needs solving. Not every emotion needs to be analyzed. Some things are meant to be felt, lived through, breathed into, not dissected. There is power in stepping back from the mental theater, in seeing the show without becoming the actor, in watching the storm without forgetting. You are not the sky. That's where peace begins. In the shift from identification to observation. And from there, you get to choose. You get to choose which thoughts are worth following. You get to choose which voices deserve your energy. You get to choose when to engage and when to be still. That is not detachment. That is mastery. And you don't have to get it perfect. You don't have to silence your mind completely. You just have to remember that you are not your thinking. You are the space it happens in. That space, the one you touch when you pause, when you breathe, when you stop chasing answers. That's where your real power lives. And maybe, just maybe, you've been powerful all along. Maybe the moment you stop trying to control your mind and start listening to your presence, everything changes. Not because the world becomes quieter, but because you do. Because you stop filling silence with panic. Because you stop giving every thought the same weight. Because you stop reacting and start choosing. Less thought, more power. Not louder, not stronger, just more you. And if this woke something in you, share your thoughts below. Maybe your comment becomes someone else's awakening. Maybe the noise begins to fade. Not because it disappeared, but because you no longer feed it. And maybe that's how it always begins, with one choice, one breath, one quiet act of remembering who you've always been.